Farming has been romanticized through Hollywood. And most of the times, people think of farmers based on what they see on television. And so they don't really understand what it takes in order to have the safest supply of food in the world. And the average person can drive less than 20 minutes and buy a month's supply of food without a problem. And so we don't think about what it takes in order to make that a possibility. It takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication by farmers like myself in order for us to have the kind of luxuries that we have in this country. I don't think when people think of farmers that they think of black farmers because you don't see us as often. I believe one of the reasons is because there are just not as many black farmers.
If you go back and trace black land ownership after the Civil War, it's amazing because by 1910 or so, they owned 16 million acres of land. And then there were like almost 1 million African American farmers by the 20s. When you compare that to what was happening after the New Deal, by the time you get to the 60s, the number of farmers has decreased enormously. And it continued to decrease during the 1960s and 70s and on up. In 1999, the number of black farmers had dropped to around 16,000. And that's the statistic I think that's most frightening. How could that have happened?
That might be in this other package. I don't move so much stuff around.
My parents were
Yeah, that one. But I have a big one.
remarkable people.
That's, I believe, my graduation day from high school.
I know that everybody would say that about their parents, but a young couple in 1947 moving to a new home away from their home with 5 children and starting a whole new life. They were progressive, had to be, number one. Of course, everybody who moved here had to be progressive. I mean, who would strike out with no money, no real money or anything, to start a new life and farming and all. So our father informed us that we moved here on January 1, 1947, which meant we would be ready for the next growing season. After the Great Depression, President Roosevelt, in his New Deal, created about 400 plus new communities across the country. And in Tillery, 115 of those were rural communities. Depending upon which researcher you're dealing with, there were either 13 or 15 all black communities, and Tillery was one of the black communities, having the largest land mass made available to former sharecroppers. We're talking about 10,000 acres of land with a black community in one spot. Makes a whole world of difference.
Land ownership is extremely important and has been throughout the history of this country.
If you decide to build a city, you got to have land. Who decides where the next road is going to be built? The landowners. Who decides where the next mall is going to be built? The landowners. Because either somebody would say, no, it's the economic development folk. Right, the economic development folk that want your land so that they can do it. So you're going to ultimately decide whether or not that it can be done. It's a powerful tool. And just remember, at the founding of this country, the rule was you couldn't vote unless you were a landowner. So land is power.
My family came to own land due to my fourth generation great grandfather. His name was Frank Edwards. He was a former slave, and upon being freed, he began purchasing land. By the time he passed, he had purchased and paid for 2,500 acres of land, which he divided up amongst his kids. I own roughly 450 acres, and that's including the family land that we own together. When we start looking at land loss, certainly black people have lost land at a much greater rate than white people have in this country.
Arkansas Land and Farm Development Corporation started back in 1980, and it started as a result of looking at the issue around black land loss in the state of Arkansas. So it was a decision to try to create an organization that would address that issue from an advocacy perspective. Just as my forefathers did, or my grandfather, he left land with intention that it would go from one generation to the next generation. But as a result of land being left in African American communities, we end up with what we call undivided interest in property or air property. Air property is simply where you have land ownership, property that is inherited by a number of individuals, more than one individual, who were related to the original owners become interest holders in that particular property. And based on the way that the laws were during that time period, you had very, very high risk factors involved with air property, particularly where a lot of the next generation individuals had moved from the area. And as they moved from the area and have an interest in land, sometimes what we call land speculators would purchase a portion of that interest from one individual that may have the smallest interest. And the law would allow then for them to petition the courts. And in most cases, when the courts were petitioned by law, then they would force the land to be sold at auction because the land could not be divided equally and equitably. And that was a major contributing factor to a lot of African American land loss. During this era and this time period, when a lot of these activities were taking place, you had segregation.
There's the common misconception that the civil rights movement solved all of the racism in the South and in the country. But that's not the case at all. After the civil rights movement, there were a lot of agencies in place to help African American farmers, but almost every one of them was taken over by the white elite and transformed from an organization that helped African Americans into one that was indifferent to their needs. The book, Dispossession, focuses on 3 USDA agencies. The first grew out of the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, and it was called the ASCS, abbreviated. And it did acreage allotments, which was how much a farmer could grow. It was crucial because the more you could grow, of course, the more money you could make. So these committees, local county committees, ASCS committees, made those decisions. And those committees were always made up of the county elite, always made up of the white elite. So it was a crucial part of the story.
There are about 9 million Negroes in our southern states, and the majority of them live on farms.
And then there was the Extension Service. And until the mid-60s and the Civil Rights Movement, there were 2 extension services, the regular Extension Service and what was called the Negro Extension Service. And of course, the Negro Extension Service was under the thumb of the white Extension Service. But people who worked there did excellent work. There were home demonstration agents and county agents, and they carried the message of better farming to the African American community in rural America. And then finally, there was the Farmers Home Administration, which gave loans. And they were discriminatory in their lending, and they were rude and unhelpful to African Americans.
I've always liked growing things, and so I get a lot of satisfaction out of being able to plant crops and watch those crops grow. I think that's one of the reasons why I chose to be an agronomist. I've always enjoyed nature. I'm a person who likes being outside, but I also take pride in the fact that I provide food for people in this country, and in some cases, perhaps the food that I raise on my farm could be helping someone in another country. My passion for farming comes from the fact that I've been around it all my life. When I was young, I would follow my grandfather and my father around on the farm. I did not like going to daycare. I would rather be out on the farm. My parents did experience discrimination. My father experienced some of the very same challenges that a number of black farmers experienced in the United States while trying to farm. He wasn't always given the same opportunity to get access to finances to run the farm that some of the white farmers were given.
Any major business corporation has to have access to operating capital. Farming is the same. The cost for operating is very expensive in farming operation, both for equipment.
Types of tractors that we use when purchased brand new typically cost about $250,000 per tractor. The equipment that we use to harvest our crops typically will run you in the neighborhood of $450 to just over $500,000.
To just your operating expenses, your labor expenses, your fuel expenses, your chemical expenses that's involved.
Farming relies on credit. And every spring, whether you were a landowner, rich or poor, you went to either a bank or, in some cases, rich country store owners or whatever to get your loan. It was crucial for African American farmers to get loans from the Farmers Home Administration because the banks were not going to loan them money after a while. They were discriminating, and the country store owners certainly weren't anymore, especially after the Civil Rights Movement started. And so the Farmers Home Administration was their last resort. And when it started discriminating and foreclosing and using all kinds of nefarious practices to get rid of black farmers, they didn't have anywhere else to turn.
In the 1950s, mechanization began to take over, and you get tractors, and you're doing away with your mule, and eventually we worked somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 acres, which is a lot of acreage for row crops of peanuts, cotton, corn, and soybean. And we're doing fine. And then we had hurricane season always is one that can damage. And it ended up that and my father at that point, my mother and father had been borrowing from the local banks and changes in policies and all, and they ended up at the Farmers Home Administration in 1972.
And there were certain strategies that the FHA local administrators used to get rid of black farmers. The most notorious one was simply to give them a loan, and then if in the fall they couldn't pay the whole loan off because of a bad year, a drought, or any other thing farmers have to put up with, then the FHA would foreclose on them.
Between 72 and 76, there were 3 declared disaster years for Halifax County. And in 1976, my father was $10,000 delinquent, and the Farmers Home Administration was demanding full payment of the $10,000. Excuse me. Farmers Home Administration was demanding full payment of the $10,000. Well, what farmer, if you've had 3 disaster years out of 5 years, where are you going to get $10,000 from? And they proceeded to foreclose on 12 farmers here in what we call East Halifax. 10 of them were black, 2 were white. The 10 that were black were all landowners.
And they didn't have to do this. They could extend the terms, which they did for a lot of white farmers. They could be more lenient.
During disaster years, they have the opportunity to write down your loan. They can re-amortize your loan. They can actually write off the loan.
But that was not their operation. They wanted to foreclose on black farmers. And of course, there were a lot of cases where when they foreclosed on a black farm owner, somebody would buy that land. That was the purpose, to get this land away from African Americans and put it in the hand of white farmers.
After Dad and Mom had gone up there several times trying to negotiate to get something done, they couldn't do it. And by 1981, they were ready to put them out of their homes. So all of us go and then we say, can't we work this out? Can we make monthly payments or just whatsoever? And the agent tells us that looked at my dad and said, it doesn't matter who you bring. who you go see, you're going to lose your land, Matthew, and we're going to sell you out. Well, piece of the story that's not fully understood is this same swampland in the floodplain of the Roanoke River. In the mid-1950s, the Kerr Dam was built, which now controls the flow of the Roanoke River. So we went basically from a flooding river and floodplain to riverfront property. We actually own a half mile of river frontage. The Roanoke River is great for recreation, boating, fishing, and all of that. So we know that that was part of the reason that it was wanted back. So that day we declared war.
Is this a revolution?
Well, I think as far as the family farm system is concerned, we're in the 11th hour. If we don't turn this thing around, then we're going to lose that family farm system.
We're depleting our natural resources, and the farmer is a natural resource. He really is.
We are on the threshold in 1985 of repudiating American history itself. You know, George Washington said that agriculture was our most important industry. Thomas Jefferson said that our tillers of the soil were our most important citizens and the backbone of our whole democratic republic. And then David Stockman comes along and says, unlike Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln, farm bankruptcies are needed. Forget David Stockman. Forget David Stockman!
In 1986, when we went in, everybody, all the black farmers had applied for their loan. They were telling us wasn't any funds available right then. Go into the office, no funds available right now. Well, in a week or so, if your funds don't be in, we'll do a subordination, send you to the bank. So that's double interest you got to pay. All right, last time I went in there, the supervisor wasn't there. He was in Ford City. You have a district director is over each supervisor and loan officer, and they're in 7 counties. They have a regency. So when I drove in this morning in 1986, the lady said, well, you want to see the supervisor, Gary? I said, yeah. Well, he's in a meeting in Ford City with the district director. I leave and go to Ford City to the district director's office. The district director have all 7 supervisors from these 7 counties in a meeting in the conference room. So when I walked in the office that morning, the lady was out front. She said, you want to see Gary? I said, yeah, but they're in a meeting right there now, having a conference meeting. She said, what I want you to say, get that chair right there and go over there and sit down by this door. While I was sitting there by the door, I could hear the district director telling the supervisor who to let have money. But all the names that he was calling were these big-time white farmers that had been borrowing money from the local banks, PCA, Production Credit Association, and federal land banks. They called Farmers Home Administration that we were borrowing money from welfare. They wouldn't be seen in these offices. But what come to find out, PCA and Federal Land Bank were foreclosing on these white farmers. So USDA cut us off and bailed out these white farmers. Then showed them how to form corporations in the family. A corporation can borrow up to $5 million. Here, some of these farmers had 3 and 4, 5 corporations in one family. Look. I mean, that's millions of dollars that they can borrow, put in the bank in their name. They had us on the supervisor bank account.
Supervise means I'm borrowing money from the Farmers Home Administration. I can't get it unless the agent approves it. But I'm the one who's responsible for paying it back. I'm the one that's going to pay the interest. If the white farmer went up there and he got approved for a loan, his money, he wrote a check was written to him, and he would take it and go put it in his bank account. It's like you giving your child an allowance and saying to him, now you can't spend this unless I give you approval. So the kids downtown, you at home, he wants to, and this is before cell phones, and he wants he wants to buy something. He got to get on the bus ride back home to you to get permission to, it's just ridiculous.
So then when I heard this conversation in the conference room that was going on, I got up, I got so many up and to kick the door open. Because he was lying, the supervisor here had been telling us live, and I could hear the district director telling them who they had let have money, and they were back down white boys. So that pissed me off. I went to kick the door in, but the lady grabbed me, wouldn't let me do it. Because she said, they're going to lock you up. Shit, I don't care. When the meeting was over, they walked out of this conference room. The supervisor, I knew him personally. He looked at me and ran down to his office and locked the door. Supervisor come to me, hey, well, what can I do for you? I said, we can't do nothing but fight. I said, man, you better lie to us. I said, Joe, who you financing? You financing it was that with PCA and Federal Land Bank and all that. Now y'all cutting us off and bailing them out. And that's what happened. So I went back home, called all the guys that I knew, and told them what was happening. Well, what can we do? That's the only thing I know we can do is file a complaint to the Secretary of Agriculture. And that's what we done, filed that complaint, and that's what got the ball rolling.
There had been a lot of agitation among black farmers about what was going on. And I think it was 1980 that Timothy Pigford testified to a congressional committee about his experiences with trying to get loans to buy a farm. And it was just an excruciatingly bad story he told about discrimination. Well, time passed and there were other efforts to organize. And finally in the 90s, a group of black farmers started organizing to sue the Department of Agriculture. Timothy Pigford was the lead plaintiff in this case, and there were a lot of others behind him.
We had been fighting here in Tillery, my family since 76, and in 81, the Concerned Citizens of Tillery formed a group called the Land Loss Fund. Eventually, folk heard about us in eastern North Carolina, and we began to do work outside of the Halifax County. We had interns that came who volunteered and spent their summers here to work with the summer camps and on health issues. And one of the kids who had been here called me one day and said, have you heard about this black farmers are going to rally in Washington? And we had heard nothing about it. I don't know why, but at any rate, we got the word, and we couldn't find any men to go with us. So I took 12 women, farm women, to Washington, D.C. for the rally that John Boyd and attorney James Maillard had called for in front of the White House. And that was the day that I met Tim Pigford. We discovered it wasn't just fighting here in Tillery and in Halifax County and North Carolina. There were groups fighting all across the country. The National Black Farmers and Agriculturalists Association was formed in 1997 to recruit black farmers from across the country to become class members of the Pigford v. Glickman class action against the United States Department of Agriculture.
Now, a hearing on possible discrimination in loan processing by the Agriculture Department. Wednesday, the Congressional Black Caucus heard from Agriculture Secretary Dan Glickman and members of the National Black Farmers Association. Representative Maxine Waters of California chairs the 3-hour and 10-minute hearing.
My father has been farming for about 50 years or more now. My father has been a victim of unlawful racial discrimination by the USDA of various farm credit programs on a continuing basis ranging from 1983 to this date. He has been wrongfully denied credit, extended less credit than he applied for. When he did get funding, it was too late to permit him to realize the full potential of his intended crop.
FHA, or Farm Services, has some good programs. And the programs are not that bad, it's just the people that administer these programs. And this is where we need to correct them.
To rise up with you, Chairperson Waters, to talk about appropriating the money necessary to rid our society of this dirty, filthy, underhanded, overt, covert, stinking discrimination that has literally caused thousands upon thousands of black families to be snuffed out of the fabric of this society.
And Mr. Glickman, I would like to have my parents' case solved before they die so that my father can go to his grave in peace in knowing, and my mother in knowing that they did what was right and that they do have a legacy to leave their children. I'd like to have my brother's case settled so that he no longer sees me as the enemy because I stand up to fight for him and he doesn't understand what is going on. These cases have to come to an end.
First, when these farmers start, the lawyers started dealing with them, they asked to pay each person $700,000. The Justice Department lawyers said wasn't no end person worth that kind of money. Yeah. So then they came up with a deal. If you file under Track A, you guaranteed $50,000. Track B, they said you file under Track B, you had to prove all of your losses.
When this whole thing started, we wanted land that had been taken, that had been stolen from black farmers to be given back. We did not go to Washington, D.C. to get $50,000. You can't. I'm here on the banks of the Roanoke River where I can probably sell an acre of land for, well, no. Right across the corner over there, man paid $27,000 an acre for some riverfront property. And you're going to give me what, $50,000? Oh, no. So it doesn't recoup what you've lost, plus the fact it has taken your way of life. It has taken your way of making a living away from you. We rallied before we went in. If I'm not mistaken, there were over 700 farmers that showed up that day. It was very moving. It was a glory to see black men and women united, standing there, even though we weren't locked arm in arm, but you could feel the connectedness of us being connected and that we're going to get this done today, and we're all standing on the same firm foundation. They ended up having to move us. We were in a small courtroom, which probably seated maybe a couple of hundred. And the judge saw people standing around the wall, and that's when the judge decided. He said, wait, we can find a larger room. And they did that, and all of us were able to actually get in. The farmers spoke brilliantly that day in stating, this is not a settlement for us.
This case involving black farmers who said they were discriminated against because they couldn't get loans from the federal government has taken a couple of decades to get settled. Why so long?
I can't speak to the first 18 years. The last 2 years, we've been working hard to get Congress to approve the appropriation.
Why did it take so long for black farmers to be paid? The settlement was for $2.4 billion, to which the government already had. But it was for who? Oh, them black folk.
After it was decided to give them money, in some cases that money was tied up and they had to fight for that money. The story after Pigford was one of excruciating just suffering, not getting their money, and continuing discrimination by the Department of Agriculture.
Now that you've got the amount of the settlement, who approves the money? And now Congress has got to say, okay, we can approve this pot to do that. Now you have to set up the process by which it is to be distributed, and that takes a bit of a while. And then you come up with all of this complicated malarkey that folk have to go through in order to qualify to get into the class, in order to tell their story, in order to be heard so that they can get a settlement. And in the meantime, the government is still foreclosing. People are having heart attacks. People are being put out of their homes. You know, they know exactly what they were doing.
Welcome, everybody. We are thrilled to have you here. We are here today to sign a bill into law that closes a long and unfortunate chapter in our history. In 1999, a process was established to settle these claims, but the settlement was implemented poorly, and tens of thousands of African-American families who filed paperwork after the deadline were denied their chance to make their case.
President Obama introduced the bill in the Senate. He signed the bill in 2010 for the second portion of the $2.4 billion.
$50,000. Now, after all these years, look how many years have went by there. Everyone has said it wasn't fair. It wasn't justice. A lot of people got the 50,000. Some went track B, didn't get what they're supposed to be getting, and I haven't received anything. They denied me of a hearing for 5 years. My hearing was scheduled for 2000. I didn't get a hearing until 2005, saying I didn't have enough evidence. Now, they used my file to put the lawsuit together. Now, I don't have enough evidence, so I'm still paying.
Mr. Pigford, you know, himself withdrew from the class action because of that hearing where we tried to tell the judge that this is not the settlement that we want. And he ultimately said that he was ashamed that his name would be forever attached to this lawsuit called Pigford v. Glickman, because it did not do what he wanted, nor what the black farmers were seeking. With my parents' case in early 1998, we actually had a agreement that we had proven discrimination, and the Office of Civil Rights drew up an agreement that would give them a certain amount of money and their land free because it had been done. And so the agreement was signed by the Office of Civil Rights, by my father, and the attorney that was working with us. And we also had to withdraw from Pigford because we had a settlement. We're still waiting for the agreement to be taken care of. We never got paid. My parents died without ever seeing a cent of the money. Their land was still tied up. And in 2008, we decided, you know, do we want to spend the rest of our lives fighting this, or, you know, is there some way that we can get some relief? And anyway, we got together, we went to a bank, we borrowed the amount of money that we needed, we paid the USDA out, and we are now making payments to the bank for the loan that we got. However, justice still has not been served.
Legacy is very important to me. I take very seriously the idea that my fourth generation great-grandfather started this farm, and he intended for this land to stay in our family. I watched my father really struggle to keep the farm. I felt like my father did all he could to pay for me to go to college. And one of the reasons why I came back, it felt like, if nothing else, I owed my father. I owed my father, my grandmother, and my uncles to try and come back and take over this farm. In addition to the fact that I've always wanted to own a farm. I probably faced some of the similar challenges that my father faced in the past. I do know that I faced a challenge of other farmers wanting some of the land that I am farming. So there's a lot of competition for land. But at the very same time, things have gotten better. I don't experience the same issues that my father experiences. I think one of the things that is important in order for the black farmer to survive in this industry is that we be given the same opportunity that everyone else is given. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a number of programs that are in place to help all farmers. And what we want to do is make sure that all farmers have access to those programs and are able to participate in those programs if they choose to do so. And we need to see more programs that are going to help those persons who desire to get into farming and also be successful in farming.
But Arkansas Land and Farm Development Corporation grew and evolved as an organization. So it was a decision on the part of the board of directors to create a program delivery organization, and that was the birth of Arkansas Land and Community Development Corporation that provides the technical assistance support, education, and training from an agriculture perspective, along with a youth service program. We work with individuals, those who want to get into farming. The Beginning Farmers Program is a USDA funded program.
So when our minority farmers are able to participate in those programs, it can really help to reduce the risks that are associated with farming.
We do what's called rotational grazing. We leave them out here for maybe 2 days, and then we section them off to another section for 2 more days, and then we have like 7 to 8 padlocks out here. So one every other day. That way the grass can grow up after they graze for a certain period of time.
Ms. Robertson, she's a young, very energetic individual, and she's participating in our Beginning Farmer Incubator Program here on the site. Again, we own roughly 300 acres of land, the organization does, and we work with her to get started as a livestock operator. And she's been in the program now, I think, for roughly some 3 years as an operator. During that time period, maybe 4 years, she's been able to purchase some land, also of her own, air property, a matter of fact. And I thought that was a great achievement because it was a twofold situation that occurred. One, her going into farming and becoming an actual operator of a farm, and then 2, being able to acquire and purchase her own land and being one that was a part of the solution to what has been an issue.
I'm hoping that this become a success for many generations, that other young ladies that are other women and children that look like me can say, hey, if she can get out there and you cow cows, hey, I can too, and be successful with it and enjoy it. This is one thing that I can truly say I enjoy.
I decided to become a farmer because I really enjoy being outdoors, and I enjoy driving tractors. Growing up as a kid, you see big old tractors in the field. My uncle farmed, and a few neighbors farmed, different stuff like that. I mean, I like watching things grow. I like the lifestyle also. I mean, it's a pretty good lifestyle, simple for the most part. Started farming in 2011. Dr. King helped me fill out my loan papers.
He went through our youth program. And then from our youth program, he went into the Beginning Farmers Program. And so he's an actual business person now, young man operating his own farming operation, his own farm business.
Most people are surprised to see I'm a young black male farming on my own.
Before I started farming, I had worked over the past 20 years at the American Red Cross. And before then, I worked in a job for 15 years. When I retired, I decided I wanted to start doing vegetable farming. My grandparents raised me. We were so poverty-stricken during the period of time I was growing up. My grandfather is the reason that we had food to eat. We lived on someone else's farm, But back then, it wasn't unusual for that person to let you have some property to grow a garden. So near our home, Papa always grew a garden. So that's how we ate. It's always been a dream of mine to be a farmer. I'm a woman and a Black woman. And back when I was being raised, I really didn't see any Black women that had a farm, that owned a tractor and equipment. And I didn't know throughout my life that if it would be possible. But I kept thinking, and believing that one day I will be able to do this. So in 2013, I decided to go down to the dealership and see if I could purchase me a John Deere tractor. At that time, I had no land. Say sometimes, oh, Papa, if you could just see me now, I have a John Deere tractor. I don't really feel like I planned it the way that I should have planned it. I had to get the land.
But if you look at the first page of the Produce Safety Alliance,
We came down and met with Dr. King. Then Dr. King had the confidence and the faith in me when I told him what I wanted to do.
So they came into the Beginning Farmers Incubation Program as well. And we made available to them land, and they do a great job at what they do. They raise some of the best vegetables here on the site that you could ever imagine.
I remember telling my best friend when I first came down here, I'd just come down to my farm and I would just stand there and look and go, I cannot believe that this is mine, from what I came from. I say now that when I graduated high school, I didn't have a bathroom in the house. I remember, and this makes me emotional, one day we were all in class. I was 10th grade. And when you live in the country, everybody, all your classmates and schoolmates know where you live at. So we were sitting there and we were getting ready to change classes. And this guy got up and he told everybody in the classroom, he said, Mary Alice don't have a bathroom in her house and she take a bath in a number 3 tub. I thought, well, he's telling the truth, but it still hurt because he was being mean, He was just literally being mean. But I work so hard. And I get up at night now and I walk through the house and I thank God. I have a bedroom and I have a bathroom a few feet away. I worked for it. It was not given to me. My husband and I worked so hard. And I think I have truly, truly been rewarded for my hard work because I look back and I think about my papa. I think about what he provided for us, and he did the best that he could do with what he had to work with. He didn't have the opportunity to get an education. Papa was born in 1899. He didn't have the opportunity to learn to read and write, but he always told me when I'd be out there working with him in the field, he would say, baby, you need a learning. You don't want to be like Papa. You need a learning. He never said education because his vocabulary didn't even include the word education. And I truly listened to Papa. And the things he said, he did, it motivated me. And I hold on to farming because that's vegetable farming. And like I say, what I hold on to it about is because of my papa. Because of my papa. And I feel like I've worked over 40 years and now I'm having fun. I am actually having fun farming. My life is wonderful. I don't know anything else that I want to do. There's only a certain amount of time that we have in this life. So I didn't have the perfect childhood. But I feel like right now, I've got the perfect life in adulthood. I just don't know how to put it into words that would make somebody else understand it. But I am enjoying my farming. I love it. I really do.
Blood of a slave, heart of a king. They want my freedom. Chain shackled my dreams, emancipated who? No ending in sight. They say they freed up land. Natives say they never had the right. My man tell me, yo, the 13th set us free. I said the date the 14th. He took a breath, explained it to me. No paper defending me. Sherman there telling me they gon' give me 40 for the free. Lives move on. I'm thinking Canada. Maybe New York. My family worked the fields. Whips and whelps explain the field. Rations, lard, pork. Maybe cornmeal, I'm sorry, but I gotta get a better deal. See, I survived. Bullets and bayonets. Went from white men saying nigga to thanks to saving my neck. Seen slaves earn respect. Gotta keep Confederates in check. And I'm supposed to believe. Field order 15, man, please. He went on to explain to come up. Things have changed, we can get the one up. Mules help us get the land of fairy tales. 40 in the mule, this boy here so confused. I'm amused, I agree. To go ahead, a man speak. Just won the war, I can't have a better week. Let's go and see. Picture what I could have been. Don't compare to what I'm living in. I see the future where I could have went. Wondering if we could ever win. Despite it all, we move forward, we move up. Don't back down, can't give up. See, I picture what I could have been. Don't compare to what I'm living in. Despite it all, we move forward, we move up. Don't back down.